or you aren't going to hold people to some sort of standard of like, you have to be in doing this for 25 years and then we'll let you do this other thing, then we have to vote and support those candidates, right? We can't just say business as usual. We have to work hard and really rally, bring 5 of our friends to the polls, right? Like, we have to do that work if that's the thing that we want to see happen.
Yep, definitely. And you've also had the advantage of being in both Black Wall Streets, well, in the sense of being near Tulsa and definitely being in Durham. So I was just wondering, in just being a researcher, and what your comparison of those two places are. A lot of people talk about those being the great Black Wall Streets of history, but you've actually seen both of them as they are now. So I just wondered if you can make some comparison as to how they are and what their similarities are, what their differences are in the way that they've been developed after being two of the historical Black Wall Streets, because we know there were a number of Black Wall Streets around the country.
Right. So I'll be honest, I haven't been to Tulsa yet because I've only lived in Oklahoma since July, and I just haven't had time, but it's on my list. I mean, I've done a lot of reading, and obviously, I've taught about it because it's just part of the, things that we sort of talk about here. So I don't really have a comparison. I will say that I still think there's still so much potential for Black entrepreneurship and like Black uplift in Durham. And so just trying to be strategic and smart and thoughtful about the way we implement those things, right? Because economic development is coming. And that, I should say, that's one thing I really appreciated about Pierce when he ran for council in 2017, is that he also, I should say, his campaign in the local election was also such a love letter to Black Durham, right? Like, I can remember going to every candidate forum, and he just reminded us about how much money had been, put into such a small radius in the city of Durham and that downtown block. And he kept us honest about some of the numbers about the Black people, Black and Latinx people that were being evicted. And I think that he was also very, very aware of sort of, the city is changing, right? And so how do we keep the history that we know and love? I mean, I love the history of Durham. I love the city of Durham. And I love what it meant for me just as a young Black professional to get to live there, to buy my first home there, right, to know that that can happen in a place like Durham, right, and that's the history that we have, economic power in a place, and I think that's really important. And so I think, the thing about Tulsa right now, obviously, is, this is next year is like the 100 years since the race massacre, and so a lot of people have turned their eyes on Tulsa. One of my colleagues does research on Tulsa. And so it's just such an interesting thing to think about. It's not that, we didn't have a massacre in the city of Durham, but there was so many economic development programs and urban renewal, right, that took out our neighborhoods, building 147, right? And so it wasn't a massacre in the same sense, but it was a devastation of the Black community, right? And so you do wonder what could have happened if we had sort of not made those decisions. And so I do think it's important to think about the council's role, even today, is like, what are we doing to make sure that there's still Black entrepreneurship in a city where Black entrepreneurship was born, right? Like, you think about the NC Mutual, that's an amazing story of entrepreneurship, right? And the outputs that come from that endeavor in terms of Hillside High, right, North Carolina Central, Lincoln Hospital, right? When you think about the outputs in terms of what it meant to be Black at that time, those are good things. So how do we maintain that? How do we make sure that Durham stays within that tradition, not to be old school, right? We can be innovative and we can still be forward thinking, but, we should have, that same, like, we should be able to still maintain that historical Black entrepreneurial spirit and be able to own the businesses in our community and, those types of things.
Yeah, definitely. And I was just coming back to the presidential politics and everything. Were you surprised, or did you listen to the debate and have you followed the analysis? But it seems to me that Biden made a promise to deliver a Black woman to the Supreme Court. Some people are already speculating that that's Kamala. And then he also said he was going to get a woman in office. I've heard everybody from Elizabeth Warren to Amy K to I've now hearing people spotted the idea that it could be Stacey Abrams. So I just wondered what your thoughts are. What were you surprised that he made that kind of a commitment to go that far? I mean, because I know one of the other articles that you wrote was about the power of women of color and how they are starting to have even more of a role on the national political landscape. And with him making that promise, that definitely seems to validate that kind of stance.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a strong step, and I think it's a strong signal. I mean, I will say, hopefully he's more thoughtful, right? Because you can think about 2008 with McCain picking Sarah Palin, right? Sort of, I think he hoped it would be like, oh, look, we put a woman. It's any woman, everyone's just going to support her. I think that's not going to be true, right? So I think he needs to be strategic. Yes, would I like to see him pick Warren? Absolutely. I think she's competent. I think she has a plan for everything. But, there's also, obviously people were not quite ready for her at the presidential level. I don't know what that means at the vice presidential level. Of course, Abrams is very popular. She has a national profile. People seem to like her. And to be fair, she almost won her election, right? It's hard to imagine that if there weren't for the, people being removed from voter rolls, that she might already hold office, right? So I think that's important. I think Kamala would, could potentially be a good Supreme Court nominee. I just hope it's thoughtful, right? Going back to something I said earlier, like, don't just pander. Don't just think, oh, I'll look cool if I nominate a woman. Like, no, pick the right woman that's going to bring something to your administration, the right woman that's going to be a good partner for you that you can work with, and that we know if, together, you two are going to bring the country forward, right? And thinking about even when Obama picked Biden, I think those were some of the things that he thought about in picking Biden as a running mate, right? Like, here's some things that Joe Biden is good at or better. He has this experience. He can do these things. That's a good partner for my presidency, right? Not just a scheme or a scam or some sort of, thing, a novel thing that gets people allegedly to vote for me. I think that's probably not a good plan. I think it should be thoughtful. And I'm obviously interested in it. But, it still needs to be the right person. And I would say that for whoever he picks, I hope it's the right person that we can really see, okay, this administration together, I can see how they're going to move us forward on X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, because I know some people, and I was even one of them, who were thinking that it could have been just because she's been such an advocate in the House, not in the Senate, but in the House, that it could be Alexandria Cortez, who you mentioned earlier. But then I had forgotten. I knew that there was the 35-year-old rule for the president, but friends of mine had told me that same rule exists for the vice president. I don't know if that's the case or not, but that's what friends have told me, that 35-year-old rule exists for both of those positions. So I haven't done the research to see if that's actually the case. I don't know if you know that's the case or not, but I do know that I did look it up and see that it was the rule for the president. I'm not sure if it's the rule for the vice president.
I don't know off the top of my head either. That's like beyond me. But I think he has some good choices. And like I said, I hope he was serious about it, right? I hope he wasn't just saying it to, pander. But again, I still think it needs to be the right woman. If that's the sort of the route he's going to take. I think, we all have baggage, right? So I think it could go either way. But I hope he's just thoughtful and really, again, thinking about it as a team effort of like, together we can move our administration forward. I think that's a better approach than like, oh, if I do this, I'll pick up X, Y, and Z voters. Like, I don't know if that's true, because surely there are some women who don't like any of those women, right? Or there's people of color that don't like any of those women of color, right? Like, so I think it just needs to be well thought out, and sort of I would want to be able to see, oh, this is a good match, right? Because then I also heard someone today saying, oh, he should pick Bernie Sanders as his running mate, and I was like, what? I don't know if that's going to happen, right? So I think people are just speculating, and obviously I would need to have a little more information about it before I was like, it's a good idea or not.
Yeah, so. I understand. And I just looked it up. It does say because the vice president could be president at any moment, the same requirements do apply. So you have to be 35 years old and a natural born citizen. So it does look like that 35-year-old rule does exist for the vice president as well. Now, in all your research that you've been doing on this kind of political front, and I've referenced a couple of the articles that you've written both about Durham politics and on the national level and everything, what are some of the things that have surprised you the most? Because I'm sure that as you've been doing this research for a number of years, both here as well as now in Oklahoma, and like you said, you spent time in California, in New Jersey. So what have been some of the things that if somebody had asked you before you got into research and started doing this kind of work on a regular basis, they'd ask you what something that you did not expect to find that you have found that's really shocked you, whether it was on the presidential side, whether it's the way that we handle politics. I know I get the feeling that you're not the biggest fan, and I know I'm not either, of the Electoral College, but what are some of the things that have surprised you that you, as you've been doing your various research?
I think the number one thing, and if any of my friends are listening, no one will be surprised at this, is I think local politics is the most important politics that we should be more engaged in, and voter turnout is historically low, even though your day-to-day life is much more impacted by what happens at your local level than any other level, right? And so I think the flip side of that is also the unprecedented access that we have to our local elected officials, right? You can go to any school board meeting, you can show up to the county commission, and you can go to the city council. You can just sign up. You get to talk 3 minutes. We can't show up to Congress and ask for that. We can't just show up to a meeting for the president and ask for that, right? You might be able to do it some of your your state legislators, right? Like that might you can maybe set up an appointment. But I just think local politics it affects our day-to-day lives. And if they have a bad trash contract, your trash isn't picked up. If they haven't allocated the right budget for stormwater runoff, you might have a problem. If your sidewalk needs repair, that's who you need to ask to fix it. That will affect your day-to-day life, and yet turnout hovers 18%, 20%, right? And so I think the thing that I have always just been shocked by is, wow, people really just don't care about these local politics, even though that's your real life right there. Every first and third Monday or whatever your council votes or meets, So I think that would be the one thing is just like, if people say, voting doesn't matter. It can really matter in a local election because not enough people are voting in them. And it is my lifelong goal to increase voter turnout at the local level. So I encourage my students. It's just something I say to them. I'm like, you don't care today, but when you sort of find the community that you love, become active in it. Be a local voter, right? Vote in every random local election and do it as informed as possible because it really does make a difference in your life, right? They set your property taxes, right? They decide how much, in a city like Durham, they set the budget that's going to be transferred to the school board, right to the county, right? So the taxes come from the city, right? And so part of that budget relationship matters, and you can attend those budget hearings. And so, well, I guess the county, right? They work. The city and the county work together, but still, right? Like, I mean, we don't get to show up to Congress and just tell them how we feel about our national budget. So I think just encouraging people to sort of be more engaged with local politics, given the low turnout that we see. And obviously a city like Durham is better than some places. I want to say maybe like Dallas is like under 6% of people vote.
Wow.
That's really low. I mean, maybe it went up recently because I know they just had some elections, but there was a time where like there was a chart that was floating around and it was just very low. So, and that's just unfortunate because those elections matter.
They do matter, and I know we've had a couple of other politician people as well as academic types that have been on the show. And we've been trying to figure out, like I said, a lot of people are frustrated with the Electoral College. If you could change something about the Electoral College, would we just abandon the Electoral College and we go to a popular vote? Do you think that we'll get to a point where it becomes like we use the tools like the Internet, which then would some people like because it would increase voter turnout, but then some people are also like, we thought the Russians cheated on the Trump election. Just imagine what they could do if we're doing it online.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Electoral College is, I don't know. I go back and forth because I understand what the founders were thinking, although I'm not sure that they thought it all the way through, right? And, to be fair, right, it was the system was set up at a time where, like, even black people weren't counted fully as people, right? So it's like we're in slavery times and it's the 3/5 rule. And so it was designed to sort of make sure that, the South didn't get overrepresentation in terms of how we vote and, but now we all can vote. In some ways, we all have access to the same things. So I don't know if it's as necessary as possible. And now that I live in a state, right, like we're never going to see the presidential candidates again this election. They're done, at least the Democratic ones, right, because Oklahoma's going to go red. And so they're not going to spend their time and effort here, right? And so that feels frustrating because I still have to live here, right? So then what can I do? Basically just going to focus on down ballot, right? I have a friend who's running for sheriff. I have, we flipped the seat here in Oklahoma, not me, but like I live here, but they flipped the seat. Her reelection is iffy. I'm going to try to support her campaign.